So I don't know how many of you have been following the Chris Watts story. Recently, you may have seen that there was recently a new documentary that came out on Netflix about Chris Watts. If you're not familiar with that story, basically, he's a guy who was married, had two very young daughters, I think 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 years old, and ended up murdering his wife and two kids. And a big part of the controversy around it, or just the fascination with it, is because when you look at this family, they look like the most, like a typical American family. They look happy. He never had any history of anything whatsoever violent. In fact, he was the kind of guy who rarely, if ever, got mad. He didn't have an anger management problem, none of that stuff. So in this video, I'm going to talk to you about a sort of an alternative theory to what went on in that case. If you've been following it, you probably, like most of us, you have this thought of, why the heck did he not just get a divorce? If he wanted out from his family so bad, why didn't he just divorce them instead of murdering his whole family? And if you go on YouTube, you can see all the different theories and videos. I've actually been watching this case for months. I don't even know how I ran across it, but I got fascinated with it long before Netflix came out with this documentary. And I was actually watching it so much I had to tell myself to just stop watching it. And then Netflix sparked it back up, triggered me back up. But you see these videos on YouTube and these other news things where people talk about, was he antisocial? He was antisocial and people just thought he was so great, but he was hiding it the whole time. Or was he like a narcissist? Or one of this new term that's called like a covert narcissist, which are people that don't seem narcissists, but they are. They seem kind of the opposite. You have all these theories out there about what in the world could have caused this. And it's horrific. When you watch and you see what he did, it's pretty horrific. And so in our minds, it's like, what's wrong with him that he did that? Because most of us, we want to think that ourselves and the people we care about would just never, ever be capable of something so horrible and terrible. But something must be wrong with him that he did that. And so I've been fascinated with it. I've watched all this stuff and newsreels, and I'm sure I haven't seen everything, but I've seen a lot of it. And I keep coming back to over and over and over a sort of different theory. Now, before I tell you what that is, let me just say, obviously, I have no actual involvement with this case whatsoever. Everything I'm telling you is just speculation. I just want to offer you a different scenario or way to look at that situation and what happened. And I got to warn you, before I give it to you, you're probably going to find it kind of disturbing, because I thought about doing a video on this, a month or two ago, but I've really been sort of mixed about it, because I think what I'm going to say to you, you're probably going to find pretty disturbing, because it makes us all question that thing in ourselves that says, oh my God, could I really do something like that? Could someone I love do something like that? And I think what we all need to realize is that we're more vulnerable than we think. And so I know that this might make you a little bit uneasy to think about. I do not think that Chris Watts was a narcissist. Not even a covert narcissist. If you look back, the other thing that's interesting about this case is his wife, Shanann, was like a social media kind of guru person. She was always posting on social media. So there is like a ton of pictures and videos. I mean, you can see their whole life like chronicled. And that's what you'll see if you watch the Netflix video. It's called American Murder, The Family Next Door. That's what it's called. And so the whole thing is just footage. That's what the whole documentary is about. But you can watch the history of their life. I mean, it's all there. She was posting on social media like every single day, so you can see it. And when you look at those videos, I don't see a narcissist at all. I don't see an antisocial person. And not only do I not see it when I look back at that footage that you can watch in any number of places to look, but also, I think this is actually the first thing I got me hooked in as I was watching the interrogation videos of him. I have this weird thing where I like to watch those. It's like the psychology of it, but I think that's how I came across it. But when you watch the interrogation videos, Number one, I don't think he's a narcissist because he didn't hold out all that long. Like, he was brought in for questioning the first day. They brought him back the second day after the murders, and like on the second day or something like that, he confessed it up. It didn't last long as far as him trying to run and hide from it. And I think if he was a narcissist, he would have had this like, I'm smarter than y'all, I can get by with this on y'all, y'all are never gonna catch me kind of mentality. But he didn't, and you could see it. Like, it was kind of like a weak effort. I hate to say it, but it was a weak effort to get by with it. And I don't really think he was like some kind of non-feeling antisocial person, because one of the things they show in the video footage is they show him taking the lie detector test, which was the thing that kind of cracked the case, basically. They gave him the lie detector test. He didn't pass it. And so they just started pushing him and say, look, I know you know that you're lying because you didn't pass the test. And they just pushed him till he broke. And honestly, the investigators were totally awesome, but didn't even take that long. But he failed that so blatantly bad because he is an emotional person, because he does feel, I think. And so he didn't have a lot of control over his emotions and the reading and that. So there's just a lot of reasons why I really reject the idea that he's a narcissist or an antisocial, which are kind of the popular thoughts out there. And I think the reason that's popular thought is because it makes us feel better, right? It makes us sleep better at night to think that this is some horrible monster that has this crazy defect that I don't have, and that my loved ones could never have, my children could never have, and that could never happen to us. So it makes us feel better to sort of put them in that category, I think. But I honestly don't think it's either one of those things. I think it's a combination of several things, but two major pieces that, in my mind, I think was what went wrong here. The first thing is, I think he had an addiction. Now, before I tell you more about that, let me just say this. I had a supervisor I call it when I was a baby counselor. You have to go to supervision when you're a new counselor, which is basically like where you talk to other counselors about your sessions and your clients to make sure you're keeping your head on straight. Anyways, I had a supervisor, and he would often say, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that has always stuck in my head. So I'm always pretty careful. I'm always extra mindful not to just immediately label something addiction. And you may be thinking, Amber, what are you talking about? It's not addiction. Like, there's no like drug or alcohol use. He was in an addicted state because of the affair that he had. And I'm going to come back and pull apart those pieces to that in just a minute and explain that, because that might be a little bit like, what? But from a biological brain-based perspective, I'm going to talk about that and how that could put you in such a delusional, crazy state of mind. And then that also might answer for you, why am I talking about that on this channel? Because if you're new here, then you're watching Put the Shovel Down, which is a channel all about the science and psychology of addiction. And yes, this is going to connect in. That's why I'm talking about it, not just because I'm fascinated about it. The other piece of that puzzle that's the big piece is one thing about Chris Watts' personality that you can see coming through over and over and over is his conflict avoidance. That was a huge piece of who he was. He was constantly avoiding things with his wife. She was a strong personality, a strong woman, not horrible or mean or abusive or anything like that, which I know, like, there's a lot of people out there that want to like victim blame, which I think is horrible. Like, are you crazy? And she could be a strong woman. That doesn't mean that's why that happened. That's ridiculous. Anyways, he was really conflict avoidant, not just with his wife, but his mother was also a really strong-minded, opinionated woman. In fact, so much so that his mother and his wife never really got along. There was just like all this conflict between the two of them. And then he was kind of constantly in the middle, and he wouldn't really stand his ground on either side, and that caused problems. And then, so you got this very conflict avoidant person who then gets in an affair with this other woman named Nicole Kessinger. And she was another very strong female personality. So you're starting to see this sort of pattern of him falling in between all these women with these strong personalities, and how he dealt with that or didn't deal with that or avoided issues there. And you can kind of start to see how these like puzzle pieces eventually start to fit together. In our office, we use a personality typing system called Enneagram. Hey, let me know that in the comments or chats if you ever heard of Enneagram. People that have heard of it, usually like, it's almost like a culty thing. Like they know everything about it. And people who haven't heard about it, like, what? But the best way I want to tell you is it's like Myers-Briggs, but like older and more complicated slightly. Anyways, we love the Enneagram. In fact, we have a whole like recovery course based around your Enneagram personality type. Hey, leaders build futures. Or Regina, there's your name. Hey, Regina, you're a recovering workaholic. I hear you. I don't even know if I'm there with you yet, Regina. I'm not recovering. But so the Enneagram is this personality typing system we use in our office. Now, when I say that, I don't mean like personality disorder, like a diagnosis. That's a whole different thing. Like, I'm just talking about what's your personality like. Like everyone has a Myers-Briggs type. Everyone has a personality type. And they're not good ones and bad ones. It just gives us some language to really explain how we think and understand the people around us and how they think and are different and that kind of thing. So if I had to say and guess, I would say that Chris Watts is probably an Enneagram type 9. And they're called peacemakers or mediators. And in general, they get along with everybody really well. People always usually love this type of a person because they're good listeners. They're, like I said, they're conflict avoidant, so they're not likely to offend you or come against you in any kind of way. And they have a tendency to get themselves caught in the middle of things because of that. So like I said, all the personality types, like there's good and there's bad. And when you're a mediator personality type, you usually can sort of see things from everyone's different point of view. And I think as a person, that's probably how I would profile him, as just a pretty conflict avoidant person. So if you take this very conflict avoidant person who's married to this strong woman, who has a very strong woman mother, who is now having an affair with this other woman, Nicole Kessinger, who's also a very strong-willed person. So let's bring in those like addiction affair dynamics, because I promised you I'd talk about that. So when you are having an affair, you start to experience this type of love. Some people don't call it love, but I guess I would say it's a type of love, and it's called limerence. And another word, the word I usually use for that, is called infatuation. And so when you're in this type of love state, you're really in an addicted state of mind. And most of us have been there at one point or another, because it doesn't just have to be when you're in an affair. It's when you're in this like head over heels, like, I just love everything about you. I can't think of anything else. I don't want to be anywhere else. I just want to talk to you all the time. I don't even want to hang out with my friends. It's an obsessive type of infatuation. And that is absolutely what he had going on with this woman. Because you got to think, he's married to this Shanann, who is a great mom, who loves him completely. Like, you can tell, just over the moon for him. But they've got 2 kids. Their kids had a lot of medical problems. She had a lot of medical problems. They had all these bills that were piling up. There was the stress between Shanann and his mother. Meanwhile, he's just not dealing, just keeping it inside, avoiding. And so along comes this like attractive woman that he works with. Now, I'm not going to get into, oh, hey, Joanne, you know about the Enneagram? I love it. I love people know about Enneagram. It's like, oh, we have like a language we can talk together. So along comes this Nicole, who he works with, who's attracted to him. And I think probably flirted with him, pursued him somewhat. The reason I think that's because in some of the interviews he said, I liked her because she pursued me or whatever. And he's pretty conflict avoidant, so I don't see him being that. I mean, I'm sure he did pursue her, but probably he was getting some pretty strong signals that was all right to do that the door was open. Now, she comes in, and when you're in this sort of limerent stage, you can see how that would be so appealing. Like, this attractive woman, she thinks I'm great. She tells me all these wonderful things. Now I really have a way of detaching and not dealing with everything that's going on over here. Now, everything that we're talking about now is stuff that happens to regular people, to me, you, and everyone else that you know. Do you know how many people have affairs? A lot, right? And a lot of it's because we're not really taught about how love and relationships work and this idea of limerence. I really wish it was taught in high school. I think it could save a lot of pain. So he falls in, we're going to call it, he falls in limerence love with this Nicole, who is just all about him. And then I think he's already probably on some kind of diet and working out, but then that really escalates. He gets very focused on that. Hey, Amy, Washscat, am I saying your name right? Hey. You've done many Enneagram sessions at work. I think that's awesome. We love the Enneagram. I'm Enneagram 7, by the way, if you know what that means. Probably could tell, right? So he's in this relationship with Nicole. It just feels amazing. He has all this infatuation. He's obsessed with her. And the first stage of limerence is kind of like this, it's when probably nothing's really happened yet. Maybe you're just talking, but you're telling yourself like we're just friends, but you find yourself like exercising more, dressing better, making your makeup better, your hair better, looking nice. And if you were to ask a person in this first stage of limerence, like something going on here, they're probably not going to acknowledge it. And sometimes that's probably because they're not even acknowledging it to themselves. They're just telling themselves like, I'm just friends with this person. And it can feel like this other person just understands you so much better. They just get you. And at the time when you're wrapped up in this, it feels like, oh my gosh, like this is the love of my life. You start forgetting all the great things about your partner, because you got to remember, any marriage cannot compete with the newness and the excitement of an affair. And so it's unfortunate that people don't understand so often that it's not the same, because when most people have the situation, they feel like this is my one and only, this is my true love I'm meant to be with, like I never loved this person. They'll start rewriting history. They'll start taking it all back and forgetting that they fell in love with this person. They probably had that infatuation stage too, the one you're married to. So you just get head over heels with this person, and then the delusion begins. This is the exact same thing that happens with any kind of an addiction, right? You start obsessing. You can't get enough of it. You want to be around it more. You start making excuses. You start making all these little compromises about what you're willing to do to be near your addiction or to have it or whatever. And then you move into stage 2 of limerence. And if you look at the details on the Chris Watts case, you can see that the whole thing didn't go on very long. Like it went quick. Like I think the thing started in June, and he killed his family in the middle of August. So 6 weeks. So he had moved barely into this stage 2 of limerence, which is you're usually doing like very high risk things. The part of your brain that warns you about danger and that this is risky and maybe you should think about it, it's like the volume gets turned all the way down on that. And you're so obsessed with this person you're having an affair with, you're thinking, like, I can't lose them. I just love them so much. I can't be without them. You're not thinking, what if I lose my family over here? In fact, in the second stage of limerence, when you're having an affair, you are very much more most likely thinking, how can I get out of this? And you have these fantasies about how maybe this could just resolve itself and how it could go away. And, maybe your spouse will fall in love with someone else and you're just like let off the hook. And you get into this idea of like, I just want to get out of it now, because you're so obsessed with this person and you're delusional, honestly, because limerence doesn't last. It's an infatuation stage. Sure, it is a stage of love, but it's an addicted state of mind. And just like with any addiction, it goes bad. And I wish people understood this, because not that most of the time this does not end in murder. Like hardly ever, 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 never does it end in murder. This is just an extreme case, but a lot of families are destroyed because of this. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about. I want you to understand that it is absolutely nothing different than an addiction. So he's caught up in this relationship over here. Lori says they rewrite history because of addiction. That's right. And those of you who follow my channel, I talk about this all the time, how addicts make the people in their family the bad guy. They put you in the bad guy role. That is exactly what was happening with Chris Watts and Shanann. You have this thing inside where you want to pursue this addiction so much. And so what you do in order to medicate the shame or the guilt or whatever to not experience that, because you know you're doing something wrong, you start to villainize this person in your family. Now this happens whether it's this affair kind of addiction or it's alcoholism or heroin. I don't care. This is what happens. This same thought process. We see it all the time. We talk about it on this channel all the time about how you get so involved in this thing over here, you start to feel bad about it. And the way you medicate that feeling bad about it is to sort of self-justify by saying, you tell yourself all these lies about how, like, this is the one, or you never loved this person, or this person's mean or naggy, or they're controlling you, or whatever. The really complicated part is when you start shifting into this addicted state of mind, whether it's an affair like Chris Watts had or any other addiction, your family usually senses that, and they do start to kind of come closer, figure it out, nag, question, whatever. And you can see that in the documentary, the American Murders documentary, because they show how Shanann started to sense that something was wrong, and she was just like, I love you, I miss you. She would sort of alternate between being really mad, why didn't you answer my calls, between I know something's wrong and I just want to be with you, this like really nice, this really angry, back and forth. And so that then makes the addicted person, it gives them more evidence as to why they just need to be out of this relationship, and why you're the bad one, and why they don't need to listen to you, and why your opinion doesn't count. So whether you're the spouse, the parent, whatever, and you're almost like you're competing with this addicted state of mind, you're now dealing with someone that is delusional. They've got all that dopamine working in their brain, that obsession, those endorphins. And the thing about an affair that makes it particularly addictive, more addictive than maybe just having an infatuation, love with someone else, like if you're not married and they're not married, is the secrecy and the I can't have you part of that process makes it all that much more addictive. Now, there's like a lot of talk about, was it Nicole's fault? Did she, what did she have more to do with it? I definitely think she had more to do with it than she acted, because she acted like she didn't even, like he told her he was separated or getting divorced or whatever and it was over. But I don't believe that for 1 second, because the wife Shanann was on social media like 24/7 posting everything. And if you're in a relationship with some guy, of course you're going to Google that up. And it showed on her search history that she had sort of searched Shanann. So I don't buy that she didn't know that he was still in a relationship with his wife. In fact, his wife Shanann was pregnant with their third child. And so she tried to act like she didn't know. I don't really buy that. But I can understand if you're in that situation where you would want to say you didn't know that, because you really feel like the villain then, especially the whole country's looking at you, the whole world. Let's see. Joanne says psychologically the brain probably changed like an addict. That's exactly what I'm saying, Joanne. The brain is changing like an addict. And he's getting into this, and he's getting more delusional. So the question here is why didn't he get a divorce? So I want you to combine everything I just told you about addiction and limerence, combine it in with how avoidant he was, how strong of a personality Shanann was, how strong of a personality Nicole was. And I think he knew that he could never get a divorce. In fact, in some YouTube video I watched this past weekend, I think maybe there's a book coming out, something called Letters from Chris, where in one of the letters he says that he never thought about divorce. He just had this fantasy, I think, that he could just sort of do away with it. Because if he would have tried to divorce Shanann, it's pretty clear from watching it, she would have fought tooth and nail. This woman was not somebody that's like not going to fight for her family. She would have fought, and he knew that. And if he had been lying to Nicole, which I'm sure he had definitely told her some lies, because that's just what happens, all that would have come out. And I think he knows that he could not have just divorced this family and went there. So he starts to imagine this scenario of, how do I get out of this? And this is what he came up with. In fact, in the most recent stuff that's coming out, I don't know if it's evidence, but somewhere along the way, I think it says in the letters that he talked about trying to give Shanann, before he murdered her, this was like a few weeks before, tried to give her some medicine that he thought might make her abort that baby. because he just had this fantasy of, I want out. And I've heard other addicts talk about things like this. They don't necessarily tell it to you in the moment when it's happening, but they'll tell it to you when they're in recovery, and they'll say, oh yeah, like when I was in the middle of my addiction, I thought about, like, what if my parents died? I get all that inheritance money and I could just blow it, I could just use it all on whatever. These are crazy thoughts. And I don't want you guys to think at all that I'm saying that most people that have an affair or most people that are addicts or alcoholics murder their families. Obviously, this is an extreme case. But when you look at it and you put all these little factors in place, to me, you can see what happened here. And it's a little more scary to see it that way because, like I said, I don't think it was some major, huge mental health problem. I don't think it was some like personality disorder or he didn't have a conscience. I think he got wrapped up in a situation, and because he's so conflict avoidant, he just wanted out and he wasn't thinking straight. And this, I don't think it was impulsive. I think he had been thinking about it along the way. I don't know if he planned to do it the night he did it, but I think he'd been fantasizing about a way out. And I think his fantasy was, I'm just going to have this story that, I told Shanann that I wanted out, and then she ran off with the kids, and that she's just mad at me and she just ran off somewhere, because that's the story he tried to spin initially. And clearly, it wasn't well thought out. Because one of the things that you're going to ask yourself when you're watching this documentary or these YouTube videos, you're going to be thinking like, okay, dude, not that I would murder my family, but if I was going to, I would have thought it out way better than that. I mean, the whole thing was just like a giant disaster. Like he like murdered them, and then he took them to his job site, right? Like they weren't going to look there. I don't know. There's just 1,000 things about it that wasn't very well thought out. And that tells you just how delusional that state of mind is. And it's like when I get so obsessed and I can't think about anything else, and I just want this thing, I start to self-justify. I start to villainize this other person. And one of the things in the newer reports that's coming out, and some of his letters, I think, and it said, how are you feeling? He said, I was so angry at her. I was just furious. And you're like, why are you so furious? Like, of course, there were stresses in a marriage, there were problems, but she was saying, like, I love you. What do you want me to get you from the grocery store on the way home? Like, what is it you're so furious about? And the so furious part comes from this delusion that happens when we're trying to self-justify. And as bad as I hate to say it, it can happen to anyone. Anyone can get in this state of mind. I'm not saying that anyone or everyone would murder their family, but I'm saying that you can probably think about a situation in your life or a loved one or a friend who on some small scale has been in this sort of deluded state of mind where you're convincing yourself of something that is not true, and you're doing it to justify something that you want. That's how the psychological process of addiction works. And when I'm talking to a new client, that's the thing that I'm looking at. I'm looking at, do they have this thought process going on? Because you're almost always going to see that when it comes to addiction. Let's see what Michelle says here. Michelle's got an interesting comment here. Let's put it up here. Michelle says, Nicole definitely Googled things like Killer's Mistress book, and the guy I'm with says he's going to leave his wife. Right. You can see like there's like evidence of that because they have like her phone records. So I'm sure she didn't know everything, because I'm sure that Chris was lying on both sides, but she definitely knew a lot more than she said. Do I think she told him to kill his family? No, I don't think that. I think that this man got caught and he could not figure a way out. And this is what he chose to do, unfortunately, about it. And it's a tragedy. It's horrible. And I don't even want to talk about the details of it. You can watch it if you want. But there's just a lot of disturbing parts about it. For me, the most disturbing thing is after he killed those girls, he put them in this oil barrels, and the opening was like 9 inches. I mean, that's just gruesome. So it's upsetting to think about. But people, when they're in active addiction, they get in this state of mind. And so if you're watching and you're in recovery, let me know if you've been, I'm not saying you killed your family. You haven't killed your family. But have you been in this deluded state of mind where you were convincing yourself of something, or you were in this desperate mode where you make desperate decisions, right? You see addicts and alcoholics make desperate decisions all the time, like hold up the gas station and do it in a stupid, terrible way that you know you're going to get caught. It's this like, I'm so focused on this, I'm going to do whatever it is to get it. And that risk avoidance thing is turned way down in your brain. So you just start making these stupid, irrational, desperate mistakes, like taking money out of your parents' wallet that you know tomorrow morning they're going to notice. But in the moment, you're just like, it's addiction puts you in this like instant gratification state of mind with little to no concern about long-term consequences. You just think, I'll deal with that later. I'll deal with that later until sort of the day of reckoning comes. Let's see.